I'm really happy about this next video because CNN actually told the truth about the United States and Iranian relations. It's a very, very, very rare Secular Talk segment, as all of you know, that I give credit to CNN, but this is one of those segments. So enjoy the short but accurate history lesson that you're about to get here.
There's little love lost between Iran and the United States.
Well, it is now Washington's move after Iran retaliated.
Relations between the two countries have been troubled for more than half a century. But where did the conflict start? To understand that, we need to go back to the 1950s and this man, Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh, who became prime minister in 1951, was key in nationalizing the country's British-controlled oil fields.
British experts were granted a concession to
As a result, the British enlisted the US to get rid of him. In 1953, the CIA and MI6 backed a coup ousting Mossadegh, restoring instead Iran's monarch, the Shah. But the Shah became unpopular at home for his lavish spending, ostentatious lifestyle, and the torture of dissidents. That all changed in 1979. The Islamic Revolution ushered in change, forcing the Shah to flee the country. The high-ranking Shia religious leader Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile in February to become Iran's supreme leader. Later that year, amid death to America chants, Iranian students stormed the US embassy in Tehran, taking 90 people hostage, including 66 Americans. Ultimately, all the hostages were released in a siege lasting 444 days. But the damage was done. The US designated Iran a state sponsor of terrorism 3 years later. In the 1980s, Iran and Iraq became embroiled in a war. The US was officially neutral, but in a bid to contain Iran, started backing Iraq and its leader Saddam Hussein. The move put the US and Iran even further at odds. The tension ratcheted up toward the end of the Iran-Iraq War. In 1988, the US shot down an Iranian passenger plane over Iranian territorial waters when it mistakenly identified it as a fighter jet. It killed all 290 people on board. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the US and Iran suddenly shared Saddam Hussein as a common enemy. Although it did little to improve relations, US sanctions against Iran accelerated under the Clinton administration. In 2002, a year before the start of the Iraq War, President Bush included Iran in what he called the axis of evil.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
Due to concerns Tehran was trying to develop nuclear weapons to threaten the US. The Iraq War resulted in years of violence, leaving a fractured state and, some argue, a power vacuum that led to the rise of ISIS. The terror group became a common enemy for two longtime rivals. Iran-backed militias and US troops both battled ISIS in Iraq and Syria. In 2015, hopes for a thaw in relations between Iran and the US grew. The two countries, alongside European nations, signed a nuclear deal that granted limited sanction relief to Iran in exchange for limits on nuclear activities. But after US President Donald Trump pulled out of the nuclear agreement,
that we cannot and will not make this certification,
and ISIS forces were pushed back in Iraq and Syria, tensions started rising again. The killing of Qasem Soleimani at the start of 2020 was a dramatic escalation and puts the relationship in uncharted waters.
Well, you know, congratulations to that guy for being hired, and I'm very sorry about your firing, which will be coming very shortly. Because, wow, that was a really, really good segment. That was well done. You know, I found that as a general rule, when I watch like PBS, most of the time they do a decent job, PBS. Every now and then they'll swing and miss, but very often they do a decent job. CNN almost never does a decent job. This is really rare, but that was spot on. I mean, that history was just accurate. So, I mean, that leads to the question. Imagine if Americans really knew the history here between the United States and Iran, what our opinions would be. Even without knowing the history, 56% of the country is against what Trump just did. That's without knowing the history. Imagine if we were highly educated and we knew every step of the way what was going on. If they knew that this guy was a key ally of ours in fighting and defeating ISIS. If they knew that he was on a peace mission. He didn't include this in the video, and I'm not sure he knew, to be fair, but Soleimani was on a peace mission when he was killed, trying to ease tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia at the behest of the Iraqi prime minister. If people knew that, I think that number would be even higher against what Trump did here. If they knew about the 1953 U.S. coup because we wanted to keep our hands on the cheap oil. If they knew about the United States shooting down the passenger jet. If they knew about the United States backing Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq war and okaying his use of chemical weapons and selling them to him. That's the big one. Speaking to my buddy who's Iranian, he tells me that, like, most of the people alive today don't, the 1953 coup, yeah, they're against it, but it's in the past. It's so long ago that it didn't directly impact a lot of the people around today. But the thing that did is the Iran-Iraq war, us backing Iraq and being cool with Saddam Hussein using chemical weapons on civilian populations in Iran. That's a scar where people still to this day, because I was only in the 1980s, people to this day that's a key difference, and people in Iran are rightfully angry at the United States of America over that one. And then, of course, with the nuclear agreement, they were following it. They were abiding by it. The IAEA was verified that, but Trump came in and ripped it up. And we violated the agreement. That's not something you hear often. That's not something that's said often, is that the United States were the initial violators of the agreement. And also, look at the unintended consequences of that are, who's going to want to sign a deal with the United States about anything ever again? We pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. We pulled out of the Iranian nuclear agreement. Why would anybody trust a deal with the United States? Let's say they sign it under a Democratic administration. How do they know the next Republican administration is going to come in and rip it up immediately? So there are far-reaching consequences over our actions on this. But again, I will say that's a really good job by CNN. And, I think it's important to do this segment because, guys, I'm not arguing from a narrative here. If they do a good job, I will come out here and say they did a good job, and that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So it's not like, I'm square peg, round holing some of these things. I'm just telling you what's happening and what it is. And if somebody deserves credit, I'll give them credit. So CNN, massive credit for running this video. I wish that we learned this history in class and school, and I wish that, there were more documentaries about this stuff, because the history is so important to get the context of why we're doing what we're doing today. And if we were really educated on this stuff, I think that number would be even better than it is now. 56% against the strike is good, but we'd be talking about 65, 70% of the country against the strike if we were really educated on this stuff. So, well done.